This week I'm following up on a video I previously posted on app routing. If you haven't already, you should watch that video first, as I'm going to be expanding on some concepts that were previously covered in that video. We're going to be adding a basic blog page to the portfolio app that I've been working on. This blog page is far from complete, and I'll be releasing additional videos on building out the rest of the blog page later, covering topics such as the Firebase query element that you'll see briefly in this video, as well as building out the RSS feed associated with my blog. I received some feedback on my previous videos that it was hard to follow along on what element I was editing in each frame. So this week I decided to go ahead and add in transitional elements between each of my frames so you know what file I'm working in each case. You can see the folder structure of my portfolio app here, and we're going to be building everything based on this folder structure. To start things off, we're going to be modifying the AM pages element. Here you can see the entire structure of my AM pages element. I've collapsed the script block in this case, as well as a few other elements that are relevant to us. You can see exactly how I'm using this in my previous video on app routing. The first thing that we need to do is make sure that we're importing our blog page. We're going to start by using a lazy import, since that's the structure that we're building all of our importing off of. We then need to make sure that the group lines up with the name we want our page to be referenced as, in this case blog. And then we're going to assign it the page that it should import whenever we hit that. Next, we need to make sure that our blog page has a DOM reference in the body of the Iron Pages element. In order for this page to load in, we need to make sure that the name attribute matches the group attribute that we assigned to the lazy import above. And last, we're going to pass a few different attributes to help build out this element. The attribute that we're going to be focused on here is actually the route attribute, and we're providing it the sub-route that we're generating from above, which we'll look at next. The final section that we need to look at inside of the AM pages element is how we're setting up our base route. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this since it was covered in my previous video. The important thing that we need to focus on here is the sub-route that's being generated from the tail on our app route element. What tail contains is the remainder of the route that wasn't caught by the pattern assigned to this app route element. In the case of our blog page, this pattern is going to catch the /blog, which is the name of our page, but will leave us the rest of the path. We'll then use the remainder of that path to toggle between creating new blogs, looking at the entire list of our blogs, as well as viewing an individual blog with all the details associated with it. Now that we've set up our routing reference at the app level, we're going to go ahead and create our blog page itself. I like to keep my pages all located within a pages folder inside of the source folder. In this case, we're going to be calling it am-page-blog. Here you can see the blog page. I have a construction sign just to let people know that this is not a finished page yet, and then this page handles the routing but offloads all of the display and creation of blogs to a separate element that I'll go into a little bit more details later. To start, we're going to look into how we break down the sub-route that was provided to this page. In this case, we actually have three distinct paths that our element can display based on. The first possible path we can go down is handled by the first instance of app route and handles having a trailing ID which points to an individual post. In this case, we need to grab the data property so that we can look at that ID that was provided in the pattern, and we need to hand it the route element that's going to be looking off of, which is the sub-route that was passed into our page element. The second path that our element can go down is handled by the second instance of app route, and that allows us to create a new post. Instead of having a traditional ID passed as the second parameter in the path, we're using the /new keyword. We track when we're in the creation state by monitoring the active attribute on our app route. The third possible path that we have doesn't require an app route instance since it's our fallback case, and we just have it display all possible blog posts instead of an individual one or creation of a new one. The last thing we need to do on our blog page is to make sure we have an instance of our blog post element instantiated. We only need to pass two attributes to it, both of which need to be two-way bound with upward capability so that we can toggle the functionality on and off for both outside as well as within this element. The two states that we're going to monitor is if an ID is selected as well as if we're in the creation state or not. Next, we're going to jump over to our elements folder and take a look at the AM blog post element that was created to support the blog functionality. The AM blog post element is the last thing we're going to take a look at, and it consists of three primary sections. The Firebase query that I'll go into a lot more details on how to handle in a later video, as well as the creation template and the view template, or not create. To start, I'm briefly going to talk about the Firebase query element. Firebase query allows us to fetch data from an endpoint in our Firebase database as an array of items. In one of my previous videos, I went into the details about setting up the Firebase app element as well as some basic functionality using Firebase auth. This element relies on the Firebase app already being configured at the root level of your application. I'll go into more details about the Firebase query element in a later video, but what we need to know here is that we're getting an array of elements on a property called posts that we're then going to use for viewing and editing our blog post. So the next part of the AM blog post element that we're going to take a look at is actually the creation template. What we're doing here is printing out an input for the title, a text area for the content of the blog post, and then a submission button as well as a cancel button. I'll go into the details about how we submit the new blog post to the Firebase database in a later video. The reset functionality, which is bound to the cancel button, is rather simplistic. It just clears out all of the fields that are saved back to their default state. The important part here is actually the DOM if, so that we only show the creation section whenever the create property that we're toggling through the route is set to true. This is the portion of our element that actually makes it to where whenever we go to the creation route, it shows the creation instead of the list of blogs. The view template's a little more complex. It's broken into two primary sections. At the top, we've got our buttons, and at the bottom, we've got our selector that allows us to view our blog posts. First, we'll talk about the buttons at the top. We've got three of them. One that allows us to create a new post, which just toggles the creation state. The second button, which performs back functionality by calling the reset function to lead us back to the initial state of the element. And the third button, which will delete the selected post. I'll go into the details about how we delete an element from the Firebase database in a later video. In order to display our blog post, we're just going to repeat over our post property that was provided to us from the Firebase query above. I've wrapped this in an iron selector element to make the selection of an individual blog post a lot easier, as it can relate the selected property that was passed to the element from the path to the DOM repeat. This relationship gives us access to the selected item property on iron selector in case we need to know what this individual selected post is as an object instead of just the name. Then inside of that, I'm using a DOM repeat and renaming item to post using the as property and doing reverse sort order based on a small function I wrote. I'll be going into more details about laying out the items and editing them through Firebase in a later video, and I'll be covering lazy loading at that point in time as well. I'm reflecting the name of the post onto the element for that individual post, and I'm using that to make the selection through the attr for selected property on the iron selector above. I'm doing this so that the path and the URL can use a full name that I assign it instead of some random key or an index, just to make it a little bit more readable and shareable. I store the key on the post as well so that I can use it later in case I need it in some mutations against the Firebase database, and then I just print out the title and the content within there. To start things off, I've done a very simple selected functionality by just hiding the content of the post if that post is not selected. To support that, I wrote a simple little helper function called equal to compare two strings to see if it's selected or not. This is not the final visualization that I'm going to use for my blog page, but it does give us access to all the information we need, including selecting individual blog posts. So that concludes my video for this week on how to handle nested routes in Polymer 2. I hope some of you find it useful. I'm trying some new techniques for how I'm generating the video as well as audio. So let me know in the comments what you guys think about it. If you've got any recommendations for how I can make the content easier to consume or more readable or anything really, just let me know. You can always find me on the Polymer Slack channel at @Murdoch, or you can post your comments here in the comments section as well. I'll be adding a link to the description to the commit message that all the code that I'm using in this video is based off of. But keep in mind that the source code for my portfolio is always changing as I add and remove functionality to get closer to my end goal on my portfolio page. So if you're looking at the master branch or the latest tag, it may not include the functionality as seen in this video.